Welcome to In Our Own Defense podcast. We're your host, Attorney A.D. Winters, founder and managing attorney of VeteransDefender.com, and Dr. Dolores Tarver, licensed psychologist. For more information about our podcast, you can find us on all social media at In Our Own Defense, In Our Own Defense at Facebook, or you can email us at inourown.defense@gmail.com. Check out our new YouTube page and make sure you subscribe, that subscribe button. Generally, we have our long opening with mission and our disclaimers. We have a lot to discuss in this episode. In this episode, we've created and produced a 4-part series of In Our Own Defense podcast where we have extremely talented and dynamic attorney Trey Baker from the Biden-Harris 2020 campaign. He's the director of African American engagement for the campaign, and he's going to come with us. He's going to discuss empowerment, employment, economics, and the 2020 election. So we're really excited to have him here. And Dr. Tarver, how have you been? Welcome to another show.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm doing great. How about yourself?
Oh, I'm doing well. Beautiful sunny days here in California now that the smoke is lifted.
I know, right?
Well, this series of episodes that we've been building and working with Mr. Baker on as far as empowerment, employment, economics in 2020 election that's coming up November the 3rd. I'm really excited to discuss certain things. First off, I would be remiss if I wouldn't discuss the recent passing of Associate Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, also known as the notorious RBG, for all of her extremely hard work as a lawyer, to watch and read some of her writings and some of her dissents, how she's been a champion for equality, champion for women's rights, but for all rights of humans. And that's been telling. So we're really excited to be able to honor her. And I'm excited to see all of the great things that we're going to do to support her through her transition. But one of the things I want us to discuss, what are you seeing from the impact of the pandemic's impact on the human element, the wellness, the emotional, spiritual, financial wellness of American citizens?
I will definitely tell you that people are seriously out of balance. They are scared. They are scared financially about what their futures are going to look like. A lot of businesses here in Columbus, and I'm sure Columbus is an example of what the rest of the United States looks like. A lot of businesses have closed. People are desperately trying to find jobs right now, unsuccessfully. A lot of my clients have not been able to get back to work, and they've been looking for months. As we know, unemployment is overwhelmed and people are not able to receive as much as they were initially. A lot of my clients weren't even able to get onto the site to get unemployment started. So that is a huge anxiety for people. People are losing their homes. People have gone through their savings at this point and don't really know how they're going to be able to make it without any more assistance. People are understandably depressed. I think people are fearful after the passing of the notorious RBG, and what does that mean in terms of a new Supreme Court justice appointee? I think people are very hesitant about what the next 4 years could possibly look like for them, if they can even see that far, because I think most people are just trying to navigate that. What can I do right now to survive?
And that's, I think that's why when you and I developed this series of shows, we thought that this would be critical. I'm really excited to introduce our special guest. But right before I introduce him, I would like for us to, do you think my question to you is, do you think that applies on all range of issues? Does that apply to, you talked about economics, well, the employment, but the greater economics, like what does our financial future hold after recovering from this and the confidence in everyday American? Do you think, past your clients that you're seeing, that the spirit of us are shaken by this pandemic financially?
Oh gosh, absolutely. Yeah. Yes. Financial stress is at the, I think, probably top of the list, but there's also other issues. People are concerned about their health care. For example, are they going to be able to pay for healthcare. I'm a mental health provider. People often use insurance to see me. If they don't have insurance, they're not able to see me. And so that could really take away another resource for people in terms of trying to get to their wellness if they can't come and see their provider, if they lose their insurance because they've lost their job. And then we are both self-employed, and we understand your situation is a little different because you served in the military. But if you try to get insurance as a self-employed person, it is very expensive. Or if you're not employed, getting it, people can't afford that. So that's a huge concern. I think people are concerned about their kids in the education system, their kids getting sick. We have this pandemic going on, as you mentioned, and what about being able to protect their children? We have issues of racial injustice that are going on right now. There are any number of, it is almost difficult to find things that give people joy because there are so many things that people are concerned about. This is definitely a season of worry for people. And we know that worry leads to depression, and depression can sometimes lead to suicide. So there's a lot of different areas, and why I think it's really important that we have our guests on to help reassure people and give people some hope and encourage and empower people. So I know that you are excited about him as I am excited about him, and want to spend some time talking about his great accomplishments as we get ready to introduce him and welcome him to the show as well.
Without further ado, I'll be really excited to introduce our guest. They have a great website, joebiden.com, where he talks about a tale of two tax policies, where he talks about the Biden campaign rewards work, and they plan on building back better with jobs and economic recovery for the working family, and to build back better with racial equity across the American economy. And these are exciting ideas with sustainable infrastructure, 21st century caregiving and education workforce. These are some great ideas that led forward, and I'm excited to learn more about it. And as I introduced our guest, Attorney Trey Baker, he's the Director of African American Engagement at Joe Biden and Biden-Harris 2020 campaign. He's self-described as a Mississippian, a Grenadian, a Tougalooan, a bow tie aficionado. As the Director of African American Engagement, he builds and he manages the national outreach program to support the political objectives of the campaign. Additionally, Trey works to amplify the communication strategy, amplify their digital assets, and add value and volume to their field program and support their fundraising goals. Attorney Baker earned his undergraduate degree from the esteemed Tougaloo College and earned his Juris Doctorate from the University of Denver Law. And so without further ado, Dr. Tarver, help me welcome Attorney Trey Baker. Welcome to the show.
It's good to be here. It's good to be here.
Good deal. Well, welcome to the show, Trey. We are so happy to have you here. There are a lot of things that we will discuss, but the first one that we like to discuss with you in our four-part series is on empowerment, employment, economics in the 2020 election. The first one, of course, is empowerment. Dr. Tarver, would you like to lead us in the first question there?
Absolutely. I appreciate that courtesy. Now, Attorney Baker, I know you may not have figured this out just by looking at me, but I'm a woman. And so it is important for me, not only in honor of the notorious RBG, but also to speak for women who have a lot of questions. They were some of the people that posed questions. And I know that the Biden campaign has an agenda for women, but I want to talk about women, of course, are concerned about sexual discrimination, sexual harassment, unequal pay, not being seen as viable in their environments, being concerned about needing to take care of home and school and all of these other responsibilities, but not necessarily always feeling like they have a seat at the table. What are some ways that the Biden campaign has, I think, highlighted to address these concerns, to allow women to be able to feel like if they were to vote for Biden, that they would be able to have that seat at the table? what would make them decide to vote for that candidate? What are some of the issues that Biden brings to the table?
Well, I appreciate the question, Dr. Tarver, and let me first say that it's a pleasure to be on with you two tonight, two Grenadians, two folks who have legends beyond measure in our hometown. And so to be on this podcast is really great. So thank you for the opportunity to come on, first of all. And just thank you for what you're doing in your individual careers, what you're doing for the folks back home in Grenada. As you know, I love Grenada as much as anybody, and I want to see it flourish. So wanted to say that first. I think the best way to answer your question is to just tell you that Joe Biden practices what he preaches. When you talk about women having a seat at the table, you don't have to look any further than our campaign. The diversity stats just came out for our campaign, and at this point, the majority of the women who work on the campaign, period, are women. And the majority of the women, up to 60 or so percent of the folks in senior leadership on this campaign, including our campaign manager and several of our senior advisors, are women. Many of them women of color, Black women like Simone Sanders, Karine Jean-Pierre, a whole list of people who he has around him who he trusts immeasurably. And so I would start there as a first matter, is that, when you start talking about, if somebody is gonna do policy a certain kind of way, then look at how they do their own affairs. And so women are at the forefront of this campaign and at the forefront of the national conversation, from headquarters all the way across the country. The second thing I'll say is Joe Biden is the author of the Violence Against Women Act, VAWA, that just celebrated its 25th anniversary of being passed. And so there are so many protections, whether it's from employers or just in general in domestic disputes. I mean, you got to think about the time that we were in when VAWA passed. And the impact that it had on communities of women to be able to bring charges against people at a time when they couldn't still, including husbands who commit acts against wives. And so I think when you look at the long history of Joe Biden's career, you see that he has time and time again in his actions shown that not only are women at the table, but he is particularly interested in the protection and subsequent growth and advancement of women. You talked about Ruth Bader Ginsburg in particular, and one that's a tremendous loss for our country. And when we had a staff call after she passed, the thing that I said is that, amongst other things, was that it's a shame that her life and her death in this moment will become politicized immediately, which it did. You saw that Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell came out immediately and in his condolence statement doubled down and started talking about who he was going to replace her with and when. And so you look at something like that, and it's a shame that we can't just stop for a minute and celebrate her life, celebrate who she was, the second woman appointed to the Supreme Court, everything that she did for women across the board. But another thing to remember is Joe Biden helped to shepherd her appointment to the Supreme Court through the Judiciary Committee in the Senate. So he was one of those people who, from the start, was supportive and was a part of her confirmation process. So I think, that I'm old school. Y'all know exactly where I'm from, street and everything. And so I just believe that, people don't have to tell you who they are. You can look around and see their actions, and you'll learn everything you need to know. And that's how I feel about Joe Biden and particularly the women's agenda. When you go forward and look at what an administration would look like, I mean, from jump, you've got a man with the audacity to pick for a running mate the woman who would become the first female vice president of this country, not only that, the first female vice president who's a woman of color. Not only a woman of color, but she's Black and South Asian. So to do all of those things and have that kind of trust at every level, you can just, just look at it, just point to it. You'll see what an administration will be like and the voices that will be in it. So I think in Joe Biden, women will have a strong advocate. They will have someone who is willing to dig into the issues related and have a type of policy mindset that's for women's well-being and women's advancement, women's equal pay, the whole nine. So I would feel very comfortable saying that Joe Biden and his agenda and Senator Harris and their collective agenda will be favorable to women, and as favorable as I think it is to Black people. But I'm sure we'll talk about that later.
Well, actually, that's a nice segue there, Attorney Baker. So we want Attorney Winters specifically has questions about Black voters, but I want to talk about some of the other groups. And Attorney Baker, if you'll mute while I'm talking, I think we're getting a little feedback. Thank you so much. I want to talk about some of these other groups who often also don't feel like they have a voice, and that is our Latinx and our under 30 voters. And frequently what I'm hearing from those groups and some of the questions that were generated were about these groups in particular is that they are not necessarily as inclined to get out and vote. Here they feel like they have two candidates who are over the age of 70, and they think, what do you actually have in common with us? We're under 30, we're Latinx, you are white men, and we know that Biden has the Build Back Better agenda, which I love the phrasing of that. But what does that specifically mean for our Latinx voters, for our under 30 voters who may be thinking, you all don't really have the same representation with us in mind?
So I guess taking that in its parts for Latinx voters, I think that there is an understanding, and I want to give a shout out to my counterpart, who's the Latino engagement director, Laura Jimenez from Florida. She has been a partner with me during this whole campaign, and I really appreciate everything that she's done. There was a point in this campaign where we didn't have 2,000 staffers across every state in the country and all this other stuff, and raising $300 million in a month's time, where we were all we got. So I got to know my colleagues and work with them very closely. What I will say about that is that for the Latinx voter, there's a wide range of issues just from jump, but I would take it from its simplest form, and you want to I guess talk about several issues. Usually first of mind is immigration, but that's not the only issue. The same way that Black people are not only concerned about criminal justice reform. There's everything else. Everyone is a person who is concerned about putting food on their family's table, about making sure that kids have good education, making sure they have health care, and making sure that they can live their life safely in their homes that they can afford. And so that's the first step, is that as a threshold question, that's where communities lie. But as it relates to the issues around Latinx, all of its different communities, I would say that the first thing that comes to mind is compassion and empathy. And so you look at the immigration issue, and you look at kids being locked up in cages on the borders, the community being leveraged as a scare tactic. You remember the caravans that were coming up from Mexico through the border, and I haven't seen the caravans yet. You talk about the wall and the building of the wall, and millions and millions, billions of dollars was thrown into that wall that doesn't exist, is in parts right now, that went to some engineers and geospatial plotters and some construction guys who are now taking advantage of it. So the first thing you will get will be compassion. Is that just trying to build a wall, just trying to lock up everybody, just trying to get ICE to do raids isn't the way around it. You have to realize that these are people, and the rationale for them coming to this country is because they want to make a better way, and they see something in America. They see these ideals that we claim to hold so dear, and they want to have that opportunity for their families too. So instead of turning them around, locking them up in cages, separating families, Joe Biden would be about compassion and about empathy and understanding that there is a route to citizenship, and that people should be able to go on it without fear of being rounded up and taken back to their countries and basically done away with. On the just very like domestic front, I think everything that's a part of our Build Back Better plan, whether it's a $15,000 first-time home buyer tax credit, whether it's $70 billion that's going to go to HBCUs and other minority-serving institutions, including institutions for the Latino community, whether it's our program that we did around caregiving. There are so many people who are in the caregiving community, both Black and Latino. And so providing for that caregiving community, especially post-COVID. When you think about caregivers, you think about child care, elder care, people who are in senior day centers and other things. And so those people's economy was completely unraveled because of COVID-19, because you couldn't send your kids to this place. You couldn't visit your elderly parents in the nursing home. You couldn't do this. And so doors were closing, people's businesses were going away. And so providing those kinds of opportunities to get resources is going to be huge for that community. Turning to the question on youth, which is a whole nother thing in and of itself. But with young people, I think a decision has to be made, and that's a fair question. You look at two 70-year-old white guys, and you're like, well, what's the difference? And I will say here, there's a huge difference. There's a remarkable difference. And again, going back to that very simple thing I learned right here on Spring Hill Road, look at the person's actions. Look at what they've done and what they are doing. Look how their policies will benefit you and your community. So many young voters are environmental issue voters. You've got a guy who put a Texas oil man over the EPA in Rick Perry. You've got someone who talks about drill baby drill and all this and is not holding corporate actors accountable. You both are familiar with the Eastern Heights subdivision in our hometown, and they have a ridiculous issue. It's a civil rights issue. These sets of companies were dumping a substance into these people's backyards, and that community, Eastern Heights, Lion Drive, has the highest instances of cancer of anywhere in the city, and you can plot it out for the state and the country in terms of, that particular little circle being a hot spot. And so Joe Biden is going to hold environmental bad actors accountable. That's one of the highest ranking issues for young folks when it comes to dealing with what's going on in the streets and the Black Lives Matter movement and things that Black young folks are thinking about. I think Joe Biden is going to provide a way forward that doesn't exist right now with this current administration. So the first thing, first and foremost, is college education. So Joe Biden has said that for any household that makes less than $125,000 and you go to a public institution, you can completely have your debt wiped away. You could have free education. The only tweak to that is if you go to a private school and it just so happens to be an HBCU or a minority serving institution, you can also get your education for free. There are programs that we're looking at for the Department of Education for people to be able to get their associate's degree. Just community college will just be free in Joe Biden's America. Just plain and simple, because everyone needs to be able to get a leg up. So those things that are important, those things that, and we were able to come to an agreement amongst the Unity Committee that is that was formed from the Bernie Sanders campaign and their supporters, along with our supporters and policy folks, and they were able to come up with some really good policies that really got close to where Bernie was on many issues, if not matching it. So I think when you look at the policy, you will see that he matches up, particularly for young folks. But ultimately, I think you have to have someone who's thinking about the future. Joe Biden has called himself a transitional president, and he's thinking about how do we lay the groundwork for young people's lives to be better in the future. And I couldn't think of anything better to ask of your president.
I think that was a great segue, Attorney Baker, as you spoke to the Black Lives Matter movement and all of these, transitional things that Vice President Biden, hopefully President Biden, is going to implement. I'm really excited about it, that you spoke about Black Lives Matter movement. From my perspective, I've had a lot of questions sent in. We've as we promoted these series of shows, we've had a lot of people excited about it and asked a lot of questions. One writer, Mr. Baptiste, he writes, what's the plan for police reform to curb the violence in the communities? What's the plan for as an African-American man at 40-something years old, he's afraid for himself and his own son. With this Black Lives Matter movement, racial injustice, racial reckoning, that the awakening that's kind of happening, so to speak, where people are articulating their pain, constantly seeing these issues. There was a policy in place. This question is not beat police. I've served in the military. And I've had to go serve in places all over the world before I retired. And this is not beat up on police. This is a two-pronged question. The first prong of it is, how do we redefine qualified immunity? Under President Obama and Vice President Biden, they crafted a policing equity, a 21st century task force on policing. And one of the things that they talk about is, what can we do? They gave action plans that were easy to target. It was about changing the culture of policing, changing police from being warriors to guardians. And those two tones may seem synonymous, but they're not. Change our police from being looked at as warriors. That's our military. Our police needs to be guardians. And if we come in with this court-sanctioned, court-developed law of qualified immunity as it relates to the efforts of police when they go too far, harm someone, kill someone unarmed, what are the things that we're looking for putting in place? That's real equity. If a 45-year-old African-American man feels unsafe for himself and his son just because of the immutable characteristic like the color of his skin, and then that's part one. The second prong is, what are we going to do to enhance and equip and empower our police to have real jobs? No more $20,000 starting pay. Why don't we federalize our police force and that subjugate them to something like UCMJ? The military is subjected to it. If a military policeman does something wrong, he's going to have to go before a tribunal. There's going to be an investigation, and he's going to have to go before a tribunal. Why don't we pay them real salaries that gives them real health care, so our police don't have to have 8, 9 jobs, working at a bar at night, working the football games. The military doesn't work football games. So, I think there are some ways that I want us to have this two-pronged approach to it. Do you mind expounding on that, Mr. Baker?
Yeah, no, happy to. I think where you need to start though is at the beginning of Joe Biden recognizing that the state of the criminal justice system, the state of policing in America, starts with racial equity in and of itself, and understanding that because of systemic racism that has plagued this country since its very inception, there are things that affect us right now, whether it's the whole concept of the police or whether it's how Black men and men of color are treated by the police. And so having someone who understands that is the first step. Like that's from the very jump. This thing is not built for us. And so it has to be reformed. And that's the first piece. When you start talking about what the plan is around policing, so much of the plan is things that I relate to very personally because for the last 3 years before I joined the campaign, I was the city manager in Grenada, Mississippi, and I had to hire police and I had to get police trained and I had to keep police protected. And so when I look at these issues, I look at them in, I have different perspectives. I have the perspective of a Black man who still, if I'm riding through some backwoods area on the campaign trail in Iowa or New Hampshire or South Carolina even, and I see some blue lights come on, I tense up. That's just the response. And so they don't know that I'm, I got this and that degree, and they don't know that I work for Joe Biden. All they see is a Black man. And so I'm a target just like anybody else. So that's the first perspective. The second perspective being, as someone who was in municipal government who had to wrestle with these issues. So first of all, in Joe Biden's plan, he will one, outlaw things like chokeholds. Immediately, point blank, outlaw the chokehold. People don't have to do that in order to restrain people, and that comes with good training and everything else. Speaking to your second point on giving the people the resources that they need. The next thing that he'll do is make sure that in police misconduct cases there will always be an independent prosecutor. I think that's huge because you take the whole teamwork piece out of this, where the prosecutor's office is in cahoots with the police department or the sheriff's department. The other thing that he'll do that's going to be so important in policing is demilitarizing policing, by taking the weapons of war out of the hands of the folks who did it. Back when I was the city manager, I utilized that 1033 program to get the surplus things from the military for our police department. But what did I get? I got desks and I got file cabinets and I got washers and dryers for the fire department, and I got chairs. I got a new conference room table for one of the folks at Parks and Recreation. That's the kind of stuff that you should utilize the 1033 program. It's just extra stuff that's laying around at the military surplus. But Grenada Police Department didn't need a tank. They didn't need missile launchers. They didn't need, the type of gear that you had to, have in your military training in order to solve crime around Grenada. So demilitarizing police is so important, and it starts with having capable people at all levels of government to be able to make that distinction about it. And so in terms of your question on qualified immunity, I know that's something that both the Vice President and Senator Harris are looking closely at and trying to figure out how to bridge the gap between making sure folks don't have just an all-out, carte blanche to do whatever the hell you want to do to a person, versus making sure that people can still, go through with law enforcement. So while we haven't arrived at that policy position quite yet, that's something that's in very close study. And I think it's something that Senator Harris has said we absolutely have to reform immediately. In terms of federalizing the police, I mean, I'll step outside of the campaign because we don't have a position on that necessarily, but it's not something I would necessarily be comfortable with individually. just because you never know who's going to be at the top. Like I never know about who's the next Trump. We want to give Trump an army and a police force. I don't know. I'm not sure that's what we really want. So as a personal matter, I'll just say I don't know. As a campaign matter, that's something that we haven't looked into. I think, but to your underlying point on this is that just like teachers, just like nurses and doctors and folks who take care of folks, firefighters, our public service workers need to be paid a livable wage. They absolutely need to. Something that I tried to do in municipal government was to provide an incentive package that helped to bridge the gap for them. And so if you work at the city of Grenada, when I worked at the city of Grenada, I had the best insurance I've ever had in my life. Even when I worked on Capitol Hill, I didn't have better. I had the Cadillac insurance. And so that's what we tried to provide for our workers there, because if you have those salaries that are depressed, you have to be able to give them something that will help them. And so low deductibles, having the ability to have multiple things covered, having the vision, having the dental, having everything that's a part of that kind of Cadillac package. And it costs the city a little bit in terms of being self-insured. However, it goes a long way, especially, and it really rewards being in the city system for a long time, because the older you get, the more infirmities you start to have, and the more you really benefit from having all of these protections. Also, for our younger folks starting families, and having those services for maternal care and other things. So I believe that people have to, and I'm not saying I did everything right or we had all the answers in Grenada, but it's just my experience, and it is something that we have to look at across the board. Is how do you get people who do so much for us to be in a place to make a livable wage? But most of that too, or some of that, comes from having a true partner in the federal government. So someone who can get resources down to your city, down to your towns, and be able to really help you. One of the reasons that they appointed me here in Grenada was because I had access or knew where to get access to federal resources, because I worked on Capitol Hill for Congressman Benny Thompson. And that was one of the main things, is that, I can go find a grant and execute like nobody's business. In my first year here, we cleared over $2 million in grant funds. And that was huge, because for a budget that's basically $16 million in terms of operating expenses, to add another two, it starts to give you that cushion that you need. But something that I found in the Trump administration is year after year, certain things would dry up. The Assistance to Firefighters program started to get bare. They took money away from the Delta Regional Authority, and that was something that we used for to be able to get lift stations and other things that you need to make the water run. Then you look at the COPS program. And instead of doubling down on the COPS program and actually giving the resources to hire cops and get them trained and get them body cameras and the whole nine, they put in a little box that you had to check to say that if needed, your police officers would be willing to help with immigration enforcement. Just another thing to kind of hold people down. I couldn't, I can't check that box. We ain't got a lot of immigration enforcement in Grenada, so. That's something that I think would also help too, is if we had a partner like Joe Biden in the White House who understood. Joe Biden started his career as a county commissioner, and so he started his career having to make those tough decisions that cities and towns across the country have to face. And so pushing down resources to those police departments so that they can get the training, so that you can start to have different kinds of enforcement, different kinds of um, um, staff that's certified to do the thing that needs to be done. So many times there'll be a mental health issue that's going on, and then the police get involved and it becomes something violent. Somebody gets killed when what really should have been out there is a therapist of some sort who could work with the person who was having a mental break at the time. So many times you have some other healthcare issue that could be de-escalated by someone who was trained to do so. But if you approach that situation with somebody who's trained to knock down doors, that's what they're gonna do. They're gonna knock down doors. And so that's one thing about this whole defund the police movement. That's not something that the vice president gets into, but what he talks about is reapportioning things. He talks about his daughter who is a therapist and says, hey, you have to, put some funds over here to get some of this. You got to put some funds over here to do some domestic training. You got to put some funds over here to make sure you have some juvenile justice training. And all of those things put together, the healthcare piece, the juvenile piece, and then you add the actual law enforcement personnel to it, you'll have an ecosystem that will help the community rather than try to punish the community.
And I appreciate that from a overarching holistic approach. Before we end this particular episode, Attorney Baker, there was one really important question for me. The LGBTQI community has made significant strides under this from a quality standpoint, allowed to be married. Supreme Court has ruled about marriage. But each part of that community, the LGBTQI and all of the other letters that are used to define them, each member of that community needs to have that same kind of empowerment. Each one, whether it's the trans community, being able to have that. In this administration, there's been issues in the military, whether or not trans could openly serve, or whether or not, and one of the things that I'm extremely concerned about for that community at large is losing these gains. What is the campaign going to do to further empower equal rights as it relates to the LGBTQI community, and not to return back to the days of Stonewall in New York?
Well, and as you'll see this going forward, but as you bring up topics that are things that my colleagues handle, I will shout out Reginald Greer, who's our LGBTQ plus director, who does a fantastic job. He's a great brother and really brings it home for that community. We actually just launched tonight. The campaign did, before I got on this call, we had a blackout. So black and then, capitalized out. So that's our LGBTQ African-American collaboration that we did, just because, there's so many facets of the Black community. And so whether it's Black women, it's Black youth, it's Black seniors, Black military folks, and Black LGBTQ individuals. So we launched that program tonight. And so that's something that Reggie worked on and is really proud of. So I do want to point that out and shout him out tonight, especially given the time period where we just did it. I think, and this is timely, I suppose, with RBG's death, is one of the first things is that so many of these rights, so many of the things, whether it was the Black community, LGBT community, or any other, came up through the courts. And so when it came to gay marriage, when it came to equality, when it came to the strides that were made at each step, domestic partnerships and just different things that, like, each time there was a step forward, most of that work came from the courts. The Congress hadn't been legislating anything big. Things are so tense and so ground to a halt in Congress sometimes that they're not having the ability to legislate anything big anymore. And so much of this comes up from the courts. And the first thing Joe Biden would be doing is he'd be nominating and appointing the types of judges that would protect these rights and not go backwards. And I think that might be the single most important thing. That's the silver bullet in all this, is having the types of judges that understand that this is not a strict constructionist type of thing, and that the Constitution is a living document, and we have to, as our community evolves, our laws have to be pliable enough to take everybody in and give everybody equal justice under the law. And so that's going to be the very first thing. But also, if you remember, Joe Biden was the one who pulled the Obama administration towards equality for LGBTQ individuals. He went right on Meet the Press and said that he doesn't see a problem with it, and with folks getting married and LGBTQ marriage being the law of the land in this country. And so the Obama administration had to come on behind him. And so he was, whether he meant it or not, he was a leader in that moment on that issue, and has continued to be. So I think in terms of understanding the community, having respect for the community, but so importantly, appointing the kinds of people who will protect the strides that we have made and not pull back is absolutely the number one thing that any president can do. And I think that's something Joe Biden would do.
Well, I really appreciate that response. I'm really excited about that. I'm a staunch supporter of equality and equal rights across the board. And so that's really important for me. Well, and we thank you so much for coming on to agree to do these 4 episodes with us. This has been In Our Own Defense podcast. We have been discussing empowerment, employment, economics, and the 2020 election with Attorney Trey Baker. He's the director of the African American engagement for the Biden-Harris 2020 presidential campaign. This is In Our Own Defense, where you host Attorney A.D. Winters and Dr. Dolores Tarver. For more information, just please follow us on all our social media. We look forward to our part 2 with you, Attorney Baker. Dr. Tarver, thank you so much, and we'll be back with our next episode very soon. Thank you very much. Have a great day.